I have the best therapist. His name is Dr. Matt. I can roll him out anytime I need him. No appointment necessary. I've been seeing him for decades. The good news is he's got certified healers ready to help you. Today, we'll meet Kaitlyn Vittozzi, a certified yoga therapist, and she's going to educate us about yoga therapy, befriending our bodies, and so much more. I'm excited for you to meet her, so let's get started. Welcome to the Youthful Older Yogi podcast. I'm MJ Waddell, your yogi host and founder of Share Yoga. I've been practicing, teaching, and loving yoga for over 25 years. I'm an advocate of movement, creativity, and staying healthy in mind and body after 50. And so are my guests. It's never too late to start, and there's a lot of healthy years ahead. So let's start now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Youthful Older Yogi. I'm MJ Waddell, and I am so glad that you're here and so excited to welcome my guest today, Kaitlyn Vittozzi. She is old-time friend, not old-time, she's very young. She's part of the youthful part of Youthful Older Yogi. I met her several years ago back in upstate New York, Webster, New York, where she was starting to explore yoga and become a teacher. She ended up in one of the trainings I was co-teaching with, and what I'd like to say about reconnecting with her after several years is that she is an example of how yoga can lead to different opportunities. Today, she's a full-time certified, it's called IAYT, which is International Association of Yoga Therapists. And she specializes in a lot of things: chronic pain, stress relief, couples therapy, perinatal struggles. And she helps clients improve their physical, mental, and emotional tensions that show up in their body. And Kaitlyn, I'm so happy we've reconnected, and I'm so excited that you're here. So thank you for being on the Youthful Older Yogi.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And everyone always said I was an old soul, even as a little kid. So maybe I was always an older yogi, and now I'm just in a 30-something body.
All good. Well, this is the whole goal, is that yoga is, I always said, I want to have a long yoga career from my first yoga breath to my last yoga breath. So thank you again. And again, people, you don't have to be an older yogi to enjoy this podcast. So let's start, Kaitlyn, with how did you come to discover yoga?
Yeah, so I was actually probably only 12 or 13. I was a dancer and they made us do yoga. So we had to do it for ballet, and I really didn't care for yoga that much. So if you're out there listening to this and you don't care for yoga, there is still hope for you. I kept doing yoga after college just because everyone said, oh, you know, it's good for you, keep doing it. If I went to the gym and there was no other class available, I'd be like, okay, well, I'll go to the yoga class. I won't sweat that much and we'll move on. Then maybe 10 years later, in my early 20s, I took a paddleboard yoga class up here in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, and it absolutely changed my life. I left that class after breathing, moving, feeling Mother Nature underneath me and the sunshine. And I just felt this feeling of sereneness that I'd never experienced before. And I left and I was like, okay, I've been doing yoga for 10 years. Like, well, why does this feel so damn good now? Less than 2 years later, I was teaching yoga, and now it's my full-time job. So there's my PSA. If you feel like you've been trying yoga and it's not helpful, you maybe just haven't found the right class.
I love that. And it's so true. Yoga presents itself in so many different arenas, whether it's outdoors and maybe the discipline of, because I was a dancer and I was never forced to do yoga. I didn't discover yoga until I was in my mid 30s. And I think maybe that the discipline of ballet and then another discipline of yoga, it's so much effort. And when you stepped outside in nature, on water, on a paddleboard, I mean, this is real connection. That was the union of everything. You know, this is what we strive for, to find that contentment in yoga, and it'll present itself in different ways for different people. So I always say, if you can breathe, you can do yoga, but it doesn't mean you have to go into a yoga studio and suffer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. So now let's talk about the difference between what a yoga teacher is and what a yoga therapist is. So there's so many therapies and therapists out there for specific things. So can you tell our listeners the difference between the two?
Yeah, so to be a yoga therapist, you need to be a yoga teacher first with some yoga teaching experience. So sometimes I liken it to like the yoga teacher is the bachelor's degree and the yoga therapy certification is your master's. And yoga therapy versus say talk therapy is all about here are my patterns, how can I repattern these? And you cognitively rethink it, repattern it, which is good. If you're in talk therapy and it's working for you, don't stop going by any means. Yoga therapy is really experiential, like many of the other experiential therapies, like art therapy, music therapy. With yoga therapy, kind of like my paddleboard experience, if you can feel something different in your body, not think about it being different, but really feel it and experience it, it's like it sinks in quicker. So you have that kind of aha moment.
As we all do when we first, some aha moments for people that take their first yoga classes. Aha, I can't stand this, as you experienced in the beginning. And then and you gave it another chance in a different arena, which is great. But for some people like me, I happened to walk into my first yoga class because I was burnout going to the gym, and this will be easy, like you. I won't sweat. Little stretch class, la la la. And fortunately, I walked in and had a fantastic teacher, and again walked out with this feeling of what just happened. Like I am so in touch, and I hope it doesn't happen for everyone when you take your first yoga class. It just doesn't. So I encourage people to explore. There's so many different arenas where you can explore yoga or a different type of discipline that you have that same type of experience, whether art therapy, music therapy, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and really yoga, whether it's a general yoga class or yoga therapy, yoga really teaches us to live in the present moment. So often we have a story about what we're feeling, but we don't actually take time to feel it because we don't slow down to feel it. We're living in this, narrative of what our expectations are. Really, the way you move in a yoga class and on your yoga mat, if you're out there taking, more generalized yoga classes now, it's a mirror for the rest of your life. If you're, to your point with the ballet dancers, we'll keep picking on them because we are them. If you're always pushing and always striving, what's that look like when you're with your partner or your kid or at work? What's the impact of that? So yoga therapy or more therapeutic yoga classes really opens more space for inquiry and reflection into what's my body doing? Where are the parallels in my life? Do I need to shift? Maybe you don't need to shift. It doesn't mean that if you're in yoga therapy, something's wrong with you. Sometimes it's really highlighting and amping up like the parts of you that move really easily and in an aligned way.
Yeah, what you just said about it kind of makes sense now, because I was a dancer and constantly looking in the mirror, being judged, all of that. The best part of being the dancer was in performance, but the rest of it was complete suffering. Basically, but the payoff was so wonderful. And in yoga, you get the payoff, I felt, every practice. So there was no judging. Of course, the mental, narrative in everyone's mind is different, but there's where there were no mirrors when I take yoga. There are no mirrors, no judgment, nothing. You just roll out your mat and you do you. So I think you brought up an interesting comparison about the ballet, and not that we're picking on ballet dancers. We both love dance and it's lovely. And a lot of dancers do become yoga teachers. And I wonder if that's why. And I thought, well, I have lots of flexibility. So I think my ego was really involved in the beginning when I was first starting out, because I'm like, these are easy poses. I've got all this flexibility. What I didn't have was the mind strength. I'm sure you can speak to this. That's the training in yoga? And is it the same in yoga therapy? It's more of a mind, looking at your mind and your patterns?
It's looking, I don't know if it's looking at your mind. It's almost telling your mind, take a back seat for a moment. We are a culture of, give me 5 steps to feel better, give me the pill. And in reality, our body has so much information. Like, it's where intuition sits. Like, the expression gut feeling is there for a reason. You know what your body feels like when you walk into a room of people that you really vibe with. And I'm sure everyone listening to this right now knows what it feels like when they walk into a work situation where they hate their boss and their stomach flips upside down and they just want to cave in. So our body offers us all of this information all day long, but we're in a culture that tells us, think about it, analyze it, and we override those sensations. So yoga therapy helps you tune back into what you're born with. Like, it's very natural to have those sensations. We just start to override our intuition. And where the mind comes back into play is the mind can be repatterned. We can build new neural pathways to trust ourselves versus always looking outside of ourselves. And that's, long term, the goal is that you're moving through your life in a really grounded, authentic way without having to second guess, like, am I doing this the yogic way? Am I doing this the authentic way? I don't know. Yes, the brain and the mind are certainly a part of it, but I think in yoga therapy, we try to let your body be the driver.
That's great. And also, so many of us have no relationship with our bodies, which, of course, we've been in disciplines where our body is our instrument, but so many people have not had that experience. So if someone walks into your class and they don't know the different, they think, I'm just going to a yoga class, even though you're advertising that you are a yoga therapist, and they walk in, what should they expect, or what is the difference between the class structures? Do you do asana? Do you do meditation? Do you do combination of both? How would that look?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yoga in the US has become somewhat watered down, and kind of with good reason. Like, best case scenario, a yoga teacher has maybe 90 minutes, usually 60. Sometimes it's express 30-minute class. So yoga is a holistic 8-limbed approach. Best case scenario, a lot of times you're only getting in probably yoga asana, the postures. Meditation is, growing in the US right now, which is wonderful. I'm happy to see that. And so a yoga class might be, let's say, 55 minutes of movement, 5 minutes of meditation. Maybe there's a little breath work thrown in there. Therapeutic yoga class, probably 40 minutes of movement. It's gentle joint warm-ups, breath and movement designed to get you out of your head, back into your body, kind of push away all the other nonsense for an hour so you can really feel rest and meditation and reflection. So for someone, if I get people, for whatever reason, maybe just because I'm like a kind person, I tend to attract people who've never been in yoga before. So whether they're 20, 50, 70, they come in and they're like, this was great. This feels fantastic. Versus someone who's maybe used to taking yoga at a gym, or who really wants their butt kicked all the time. They might be a little unsettled by it. Yoga therapists tend to offer too, like, a lot of exploration through movement. So maybe I'm not going to tell you where to put your hand, or I might just say, do a lunge. I don't care if your knee is on the ground, if your knee is off the ground, if you're in a twisted lunge, if you're on a lunge in your back. So in a culture where we're used to being told what to do all the time, whether it's on or off the yoga mat, all that freedom all of a sudden, for some people, freaks them out a little bit.
Interesting. I've never taken a yoga therapy class, so that's on my list of classes to take now. So to experience it, because I'd like to experience that. And did you take a yoga therapy class before you wanted to dive into it? How did you know you wanted to move from traditional teaching yoga into the therapy role?
So I was teaching, standard hour-long yoga classes at studios with you, and also gyms. And I noticed particularly at the gyms, they had child watches. And like most people leave yoga class pretty happy or fairly happy. Maybe if their anxiety is at a 10 out of 10, they walk out an 8 out of 10. So it's a little bit of improvement. But then the participants would pick up like their kid from child watch, or even myself, like I'd get cut off in the parking lot and that yoga glow is gone and you're pissed off again. So I started to wonder how do I help people incorporate these tools of yoga that have been so helpful to me. I was fortunate enough to have 10 years and 200 hours of training. How do I help people incorporate these into the other 23 hours of the day? So that's how I started studying yoga therapy. I thought originally that it was going to be like more biomechanics to like really move with more ease, which are still super important to yoga teachers and yoga therapists. And then when I went to study with Phoenix Rising, they were in the Berkshires for my first training in Massachusetts. I think I realized like people are hurting. There's a lot of sad people, a lot of stressed people. I was under a lot of stress. I was teaching yoga, working in corporate retail full time. I think I realized like it doesn't matter what you do with someone's body if they're still sad or grieving or whatever it might be. So the yoga therapy training I ended up taking really looked at yoga very holistically, like biopsychosocial model. And I think that's what we need because we really can't separate body from mind, from emotions, from spirituality or religion. Like they all live together.
And that's the definition of yoga. Uniting, joining, bringing together all aspects of our inside and outside. So that's wonderful. You talked about Phoenix Rising. So on their website, they say their mission is to support people with moving in the direction of a life worth living. And of course, finding a life worth living can be a lifelong process. And so often we feel like something is missing. And how do you begin with a new student that comes to you that might feel lost?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And honestly, if you have ever felt lost, you're already a little bit more enlightened than most. I remember years ago, I went to see Krishna Das, who's like yoga's rock star, at a retreat in Kripalu. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, but most people don't go to yoga because they don't want to change. They want to drink beer in front of the TV and then they die. So if you're looking for something more, like realize you're already doing some hard work just by wanting more for yourself. Back to Phoenix Rising, we usually work through some themes, and I'll say that healing is never, ever linear, but it's generally befriend the body. So really get to know the sensations that are here in your body. Also treat your body like you're a good friend or a partner versus like, oh, this body, oh, this extra 5 pounds I have to carry around, oh, this ugly hair, whatever it might be. Like treat yourself with kindness, the same way you would treat the other people in your life with kindness. And then awareness, acceptance, and choice. And then ultimately, there's a few other themes. So those are the biggies. If you just master befriending your body, you're living better than most. But ultimately flow, where again, you don't have to think about it so much. You just wake up in the morning and you're on your path. You be living your dharma, as some ancient yogis would say.
And so, yeah, what Krishna Das said, of course, and I think it was maybe Iyengar. I can't remember which guru said it, but if you're not ready for change, you're not ready for yoga. I think it was Iyengar, but I'm not certain. So yes, yoga definitely changes you, not just physically, if you're a consistent practitioner. And in the beginning, you might not even notice the changes or even care about the changes. But for people that have practiced over long periods of time, you see a shift, you feel a shift, you notice the awareness, I think, is the biggest thing. Just awareness, which people have their blinders on, many people, and just go through life. And like you said, If you want to, sit in front of the TV and drink beer and you're happy, then that's great. Go ahead and do it. But don't complain about it unless you want to do something about it. That's my 2 cents.
I'll say as a side note, I watch TV and I drink beer. So I hope I didn't shun anyone with that comment.
No, we don't sit around just drinking kombucha and, chanting. We are real humans. We just have a love of yoga. Yes, we all have our indulgences. I'll put it that way. And you do a lot of couples work. I wish I had known about this type of therapy when I actually was in some of my past relationships. Maybe it would have helped. But can you tell us a little bit more about your couples therapy?
Yes. So I love working with couples. To be honest, working with couples has actually like reinvigorated my belief in love and partnership. It's really understanding yourself better and how you show up to relationships. And just like we were talking about that narrative before, we have an assumption that whoever we're with, and it does, I usually work with romantic couples, but it could be mother-daughter, business partners, whatever. We carry around all these assumptions about, oh, well, that's what he thinks about me, or, oh, that's how he feels. But really, we don't ever listen or ask. So couples yoga really, it's a way to enhance connection. It usually looks like, yoga asana postures together to get in your bodies a little bit, some partner poses, very accessible. It's not like crazy acro yoga unless I happen to have some very athletic people show up on the mat. But it could be holding hands, standing back to back, looking each other in the eyes, like all those things that maybe when you're dating, it seems so natural, but even then we take it for granted because we're overwhelmed with like all these butterflies. So I could have couples that have been together for decades and they're like giggling like little kids again together. And it is just the sweetest thing to see. And, they walk away like trying to infuse that into the rest of their life. So it's nice to really understand it yourself and the other person in present moment exactly as they are without any made up drama around it.
That sounds such a positive thing. Do you have couples where one couple or one of the person is more reluctant? Are they being dragged in there, or are both people coming in willingly?
I have had a few folks dragged in, not all the time, but it occasionally happens. And it usually works out that the person who feels dragged actually ends up feeling more listened to because that's the only hour they've been with their spouse that they're not told what to do because I'm moderating. So sometimes while the other partner might be the catalyst to get them in there, they're like, oh, this is actually nice. I have some space to just be me.
How would a couple, say in my age bracket, in their 50s or 60s, how would they learn about yoga therapy for couples? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know about traditional therapy, talk therapy, or whatever. How would they find out and learn about this if they've never done yoga or heard about it?
That's a good point. I have a lot of people who didn't even know it was an option. I have some couples therapists that are, maybe it's a couple with a larger disconnect than I'm really set up to handle, but people who have been in couples therapy for a bit, and they're just missing that like intimacy piece. And it's intimacy not in the way of like, ooh, let's have sex, but like, let's really embrace touch and quiet time together. So you can ask your couple, if you're seeing a couples therapist, ask like, is there a yoga therapist or somatic therapist that we can work with in addition to this? You reach out to me. I'm happy to come through my website. I can give you more information. And if you don't want to work with me personally, I happily make some other recommendations to other yoga therapists who work with couples. I believe there are some retreats at like major yoga retreat centers, maybe Kripalu, Omega. I'm sure there's some on the West Coast. They might have some couples yoga workshops if that's something you want to get into too.
And that, yes, and we will link all of Kaitlyn's information and how to get in touch with her in the show notes. But also what I wanted to say is that as a yoga therapist, you also work, you said, with other therapists. So you can go into hospitals or different places, not
as a yoga therapist is much more than a yoga teacher, much more training, many more hours of this discipline. So do you work with a hospital? Do you work with certain therapists? How does that work?
Yes, I feel like, and this is part of that aparigraha, or like sharing, that happens with yoga. These are my clients, and these people have to do yoga with me. They can't do yoga with MJ because they're mine. Most yoga teachers and yoga therapists really want to see people thrive. Generally, it's just a lot of good-hearted people who want to help. I work with a lot of physical therapists that maybe structurally they've done everything they can for a client who is in chronic pain, and they might say there's something spiritually that needs to happen here, or maybe, in a hospital or clinical setting, sometimes providers are only allowed to spend X amount of time with people because of insurance and all that. I work hand in hand with a lot of physical therapists. Let's see, who else do I work with? OT, talk therapists. I'm not working with a specific hospital affiliation right now, but I do love working with doctors and nurses who are burnt out. So sometimes I'll go in really to help the staff more than the patients, because they just need a break. They need room to breathe because it feels like everything is on top of their chest all the time. So did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Because this is a field that a lot of people are not aware of. Myself, and I'm aware of it, but I didn't know the scope of it. And my platform is called Share Yoga. I'm all about sharing, and this is not just, you have to roll out your mat and do 10 sun salutations. There's so many different avenues that I want to share with people that may be hesitant. And so again, you don't have to have a problem to go to a yoga therapist. You don't have to, you could just, and you don't have to feel intimidated, and you should just, try it out. You might like it. And speaking of all of the great things that you're doing, I want to talk about your involvement with it's called KMB For Answers. This is a nonprofit association that you work for, and it's wonderful. So please tell us about KMB For Answers and what you do for them and what they do for you.
This is the gift for the listeners who have stuck it out this long. You get free yoga classes. So KMB For Answers is an education and advocacy organization. It's a nonprofit located outside of Rochester, New York. KMB stands for Katie Marie Bennett, who was a 25-year-old who lost her battle with anorexia. And about 3 weeks later, her mother, Ellen, who was so sick of the traditional medical system and the insurance companies and just eating disorder as a mental health disease in general, she had a nonprofit together to help other families so that maybe they wouldn't have to go through the same thing. So I teach therapeutic yoga classes for KMB For Answers. If you or someone you love has been impacted by an eating disorder, of course, we would love to have you on there. Caregivers of any type need a place to just breathe for an hour and just be and really fill up their own cup, because they are basically on call 24/7. Even if they have some respite care, it's always on their mind and it's weighing on their body. So that's any type of caregiver. But KMB For Answers really wants anyone who could stand to have a better relationship with their body, whether you are 14 or 95, get into this yoga class. We meet Thursday nights in Rochester, New York, but we also have a virtual option. So we have people attend from all over the country, many different states. And if you feel like, you've spent the last however many decades either trying to lose weight or thinking you're ugly, this class is for you. It is time to shift that relationship and share it with anyone who might benefit. You don't even need a yoga mat. It's incredibly accessible. If you sit on your couch the whole time and do the yoga class from there, I'm happy to have you.
That's so amazing that this free resource, you can do it in person or online from anywhere. And you just come as you are. Listen, going back to the ballet dancers and any type of dancers, the self-criticism about body and body dysmorphia is huge. And I'm still battling with it as I, age, because my body is not what it looked like in a leotard 40 years ago. But I think that whether you've been a dancer or you went from non-parent to a parent, how your body shifts, not just women, men as well. Everyone's body shifts. And I think it's such a great resource. And thank you for sharing that with us. Again, that will all be in the show notes. We're filming this or recording this interview in the summer, and it'll come out in October. But I want you to talk about your stand-up paddleboard yoga, which, let me just tell everyone that I took my first stand-up paddleboard yoga class with Kaitlyn several years ago on one of the Finger Lakes, Canandaigua Lake. And so if you're unfamiliar with it, there's a paddleboard out in the water. You're on the paddleboard. It's got a little anchor on it so you don't float away, and you do yoga poses on the paddleboard. And I have to tell you that I spend more time in the water, I think, falling off of it. And it was so fun and so lovely. And I just loved it. I wish I live in Florida now. I'm hesitant to do it here because there's a lot of alligators and crocodiles and unidentified creatures in the water. But Kaitlyn, you've been doing this now for, I think, 7, 8, 9 years. And tell us about that.
Well, you bring up a good point too on this Youthful Older Yogi podcast of it's safe to fall down in the water. You can't break any bones. So it's for everyone. And one of my most memorable experiences, you're like a one-person island. Like, it's just lovely. You don't have to be good at it, because nobody's really good at doing yoga on an unstable surface. Like, the goal is not to be good at it. It's just to connect with nature, enjoy the water. But a couple of years ago, I remember I got a phone call from this 85-year-old woman. This is it still fills my heart up thinking about this experience. Her and her husband had moved into a senior independent living facility, and her husband unfortunately passed shortly after. And she called me in August one year and was like, "It's all old, boring people in this facility. I need to get out. Do you think I could do this paddleboard yoga class?" And I was like, "Well, let's come out to the beach and we'll see if it's a good fit. And if it's not," and I say this to everyone, if you can't stand up on the board, you lay on your back, you sit down, you dip your toes in the water. There are no sharks where we are, so that's a benefit of being in the Finger Lakes. And you just float on the water. So what's the worst that could happen? So this woman came, and the whole time she was laughing and smiling, and it was just so uplifting. And she even said, like, "I'm 85. This is crazy that I'm doing it." But really, it's not. It's as young as you want. You're young in spirit, despite your age is literally just a number, and that is absolute proof.
Yes, I think when you visit my website, the first thing it says is it's never too late to start anything, not just yoga, anything. And that's one of the, messages. I'm an advocate for continued movement, continued learning, continued well-being as we move whatever decade you're in. The older you get, you actually have an awareness that you have less time than you imagine. And so make the best of it. And I think with your stand-up paddleboard, when I do come back and visit in the summer, I will definitely be doing it again with you, because it is, like you said, there's no, and it's shallow water. It's like, I don't know, waist deep a little bit. It's not, and when you fall off, it's like, oh, this is refreshing. It's just refreshing, and you're out in nature. And I so appreciate all that you've done. And I met you, I think, in 2012, 13, I can't remember what year, and now 10 years later, the growth and what you're doing is so admirable. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing exactly what yoga therapy is, and for all that you do, for the nonprofit you work for the stand-up paddleboard that you do. Do you have any time for yourself? What do you do in your free time?
It's actually funny that you say that. years ago, I had an Ayurveda teacher who said, Kaitlyn, if you don't take time for nothing, you are going to burn yourself out. So I try to actually take some unstructured time every week to just do a little bit of nothing, which as a high achiever, someone who always got straight A's, someone who always had extracurriculars, that can be really hard to do, but it's what fills me back up. So I try to, at least on Sundays, take a little time to do nothing, and then of course keep up my own yoga practice, my own meditation practice, and just enjoy family, nature, everything around me.
Well, I enjoyed this interview with you, Kaitlyn. I enjoy reconnecting with you, and I'm so appreciative for you coming on to Youthful Older Yogi. And I have one final question, which I ask everyone. Usually the question is, knowing all that you know now and your wisdom, what advice would you give to your younger self? But I switched that question and I turn it around, and knowing all that you know now and all of your experience, what advice would you give to your older self?
Ooh, just to trust yourself.
Yeah.
And trust yourself and take breaks.
Perfect. Yep. And that's the thing. It's always like, oh, we can always look back in hindsight and think, but let's look forward. And for me, how do I want my life to look? And you can, start taking those steps now. And you're helping so many people and helping people connect. And like you said, just feel better. That's awesome. So Kaitlyn, I want to thank you so much. Again, we will put in the show notes how to get in touch with Kaitlyn, all the links to everything. And again, thank you so much for being on the Youthful Older Yogi.
Thank you so much. And if you were not a part of my first yoga teacher training, we would not be having this conversation. So thank you for making an impact too, MJ.
You're welcome. Take care, Kaitlyn.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find me and subscribe for more youthful and healthy information on my website, shareyogawithmj.offeringtree.com. Or if you know how to navigate social media, find me on Facebook /Mary Jane Waddell. That's Jane with a Y, Jayne, and Instagram at Mary Jane Waddell. Remember, Jane with a Y. Now, this podcast would not be possible without my youthful older producer, editor, and creative friend, Andrea Canny. And you can find Andrea at Andrea Canny, that's CANNY.com. And of course, thanks to my generous guests who've shared their time and youthful wisdom. Remember, the Youthful Older Yogi podcast is presented solely for educational, inspirational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for a physician or other qualified professionals. Okay, yogis, stay well and stay youthful.